If you want to be elite in disc golf and competitive in your tournament rounds, you have to have a great backhand and a great forehand. Or do you? Here's what I mean. The most consistent and competitive disc golfers have a great backhand and a serviceable forehand. Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome to another episode here on Gladiator Disc Golf. Today is day 4 of the 30 videos in 30-day challenge, and I am stoked about today's video. If you haven't seen days 1 through 3, you'll want to check them out after this video. All right, let's get back into it. Backhand versus forehand. Is one better than the other? It's largely up to your playing style and your skill level, but we see a lot of evidence that a player needs to know at least how to do both. So let's break up the backhand and the forehand into a list of pros and cons, starting with the backhand. The backhand typically has what we call a higher ceiling. So what that means is that there's a lot more that you can do with the disc, skill-wise and shot shaping-wise on the backhand than you can do for the forehand. It has a higher ceiling of potential. The other thing is that the backhand in disc golf is pretty similar to the throwing motion in a lot of other disc sports. The backhand also tends to be far more comfortable for most people, whether you're a beginner or a seasoned vet on tour. And then lastly, the backhand tends to be more torque resistant. You see a lot of discs have a harder time turning over with the backhand than they do with the forehand. Now let's talk about the cons for the backhand. There really are no true cons for backhand and forehand. It's just really certain things that you can't quite do with them, or elements about the throws that are a little bit more complicated. For the backhand, the first thing is that it is a much more complicated throwing motion than the forehand. The elements for the backhand are a little bit more complicated because there are so many pieces to the throw. The other issue with the backhand is that it's easier for players to throw nose up because we keep our hands out like this, meaning our thumb tends to be up. And so if you grab a disc even correctly, the way you normally grab anything else, that nose is going to be straight up. So for the backhand, we have to really force more of a nose down angle and get that thumb nice and flat with our forearm. And I mentioned this earlier with torque resistance. It's a little bit more difficult to get turn out of the backhand. It's because of that torque resistance. It just tends to be a little bit more difficult to turn. Now let's talk about the forehand. One of the benefits or the pros for the forehand is that when you have a forehand and a backhand, you can execute pretty much any shot between the two. So having a forehand really elevates your game and gives you access to shaping more shots and executing more shots out on the course. The other pro is that when you can throw the same disc backhand and forehand, it reduces the number of discs and molds you have to carry, and it really helps you learn how a disc is going to fly on any kind of line that you put it on. In my experience, there are some holes out there that are really difficult to execute when throwing the backhand, even a softer backhand, because you do turn away from your target just a little bit. But with the forehand, the way you set up shop, the way you set up your shot, you are facing the target. The final benefit that I have found with the forehand, if you set up your hand and fingers correctly, keeping the nose down on the forehand, in my experience and my opinion, is much easier than keeping the nose down on the backhand. Now there are some challenges or cons that come with the forehand. For most players, it's really hard to generate enough spin and snap when throwing the forehand. A lot of newer players who are learning it tend to use only their arm. While this isn't necessarily a con all the time, sometimes you get more turn than you want with the forehand. The reason that's listed as a con is because when throwing a disc backhand, you may not be used to accounting for that much turn, but the moment you throw that same disc on the forehand, there's now more turn. So you have to remember before you go and throw to account for that turn with just a little bit of hyzer angle. And then the last thing is that the forehand tends to have a little bit lower ceiling for potential. We talked about with the backhand, one of the pros is the higher ceiling, that you can go to a course with only a backhand and pretty much regardless of the course it is, you can shoot really, really well. But you can't necessarily do that with the forehand. The forehand does have some limitations in what it can achieve out on the disc golf course. Now, whether that's due to course design or ability is up for debate. But let's go ahead and let's talk about when to throw the backhand and when to throw the forehand. Generally speaking, you can throw the forehand or the backhand on any hole, on any course, anywhere in the world. There's really nothing stopping you from throwing a specific shot. Now, there are some hole layouts that are better for a forehand or better for a backhand. But here are some general principles that will help you execute better on the course by choosing a backhand or a forehand for these 4 types of shots. The first shot is a tight fairway, and you want to throw a forehand here most of the time. I alluded to this earlier. The reason why you want to go forehand on a tight fairway is because you're able to see the gap that you're trying to hit the entire time you're lining up your shot. The second shot is when you're going for max distance, and here is when you want to throw the backhand. When you're really trying to stretch the disc out as far as it can go, you want to throw the backhand. You're going to get more glide. You tend to get a little bit better of a flex angle with the backhand to get that max distance than you would with the forehand. When you're pinched in the woods or on a fairway, you typically end up having to throw either a hyzer around something or an anhyzer. In this case, you want to opt for the anhyzer with the forehand when you're in pinched locations, because it tends to be a far more natural release and something that you're able to do. Whereas the backhand hyzer to get around something can be pretty pinched depending on obstacles in your way, and you can really only stretch so far. The anhyzer flex line with the forehand gives you a lot of variability when trying to throw, because all you at least need is a little bit of wrist to get the disc going. The last shot is obviously hyzer bombs, okay? We have to talk about hyzers at some point, and the backhand is ideal for throwing hyzer bombs. The forehand hyzer really puts a lot of strain on the shoulder, whereas the backhand hyzer, you don't have to put nearly as much angle on it, and you can manipulate the disc to do a little bit more, and it's just a much more natural throwing motion. So which one is better, the backhand or the forehand? I have to say the backhand is better, but you need to have a forehand, especially as you start to compete more and play different courses and play bigger tournaments. But I want to hear from you. What's your preferred style? Do you prefer the forehand or do you prefer the backhand? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to improve your forehand and get better at it, make it more serviceable for your division, come back tomorrow where we break down exactly how to throw the forehand so that you can elevate your skill.